Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that completely flips the script on how we usually think about farming. Most of us just picture planting seeds in the spring and, crossing our fingers for a good harvest in the fall. But the reality? It's so much more complex than that. Today, we're looking at how modern farmers are actually treating their land, labor, and capital like a high-stakes investment portfolio. They literally have to act like hedge fund managers of the soil just to survive, thrive, and dodge some massive existential risks. So think about this for a second. Is farming the world's biggest gamble? Picture a farmer who's gone all in on a single crop. They've poured every dime of their savings, all their time, and months of backbreaking physical labor into one giant field of corn or wheat. Now, imagine the rain just doesn't show up for a month, or a sudden geopolitical event makes the market price for that specific crop completely crash overnight. How on earth does a farmer survive that kind of intense volatility? When you put all your chips on a single number, one bad break in the weather or the market means total financial ruin. It is, without a doubt, a truly high-stakes game. Well, the secret to surviving this gamble is something called agricultural diversification. At its core, this just means the intentional reallocation of productive resources. So we're talking land, labor, capital, and heavy farm equipment into entirely new activities. And this isn't just a tactic for one small family farm. It can apply to individual farmers or scale up to entire geographic regions. In finance terms, it's exactly the opposite of putting all your eggs in one basket. By shifting these resources into a variety of different, safer, or maybe more profitable activities, a farmer spreads out their risk. If one crop totally fails, another activity is right there to step up and keep the farm afloat. Here's how we're going to break down this brilliant strategy today. We'll start with hedging the farming bet, then look at the two paths to diversification, uncover what drives the shift, measure the real impact, and finally explore cultivating a sustainable future. All right, let's jump straight into part one, hedging the farming bed and the legacy of the Green Revolution. Because before we can understand where modern farming is headed, we have to recognize the dramatic yet flawed legacy it's moving away from. Now that is a staggering number, 3.8 times. Back in the mid-1960s, India was facing these severe, recurring food crises. To combat this, the government rolled out the Green Revolution. This was a massive package program that leaned heavily on high-yield variety seeds, synthetic fertilizers, and intense irrigation. And at first, it was basically a miracle. Wheat yields per acre skyrocketed by 3.8 times between 1960 and 2018. It radically transformed agriculture, broke through decades of stagnation, and made a massive population completely self-sufficient in food grains. But as you might guess, that high return came with a massive, undeniable ecological price tag. That heavy daily reliance on chemical pesticides and synthetic fertilizers unleashed the dark side of modern farming. Over time, the soil just began to severely degrade. We saw rampant soil erosion, literally watching the fertile top layer wash away. We saw rising soil salinity, where salt builds up, chokes the roots, and leaves the earth barren. Plus, there was deep chemical contamination of local water tables and severe genetic erosion, meaning we permanently lost thousands of diverse, resilient plant varieties. Basically, this modern system started literally destroying its own foundation. And that forced the agricultural sector to desperately look for a new, sustainable strategy to survive long-term. Which brings us perfectly to Section 2, Two Paths to Diversification. This is where we look at the specific mechanics of how farmers are actively changing up their portfolios to survive these challenges. So how exactly do farmers pull this off? Well, they generally take one of two very distinct paths. The first is diversification of crop production. This one is fundamentally about changing cropping patterns. Instead of planting every single acre with basic cereals like wheat or rice, a farmer shifts gears. They rotate in commercial crops, think oilseeds, spices, sugarcane, or cotton. It changes what's happening in the dirt. But the second path, diversification of production activity, is a whole different beast. This is about shifting the human agricultural labor force out of traditional fieldwork entirely and moving them into allied activities. We're talking about reallocating people to raise livestock, run commercial poultry farms, or dive into specialized horticulture. It's a total structural shift in what the farm actually does every single day. A huge chunk of this shift in production activity is heading straight toward the horticulture sector. That's the specialized cultivation of fruits, vegetables, flowers, and spices. In fact, India has leaned into this so much that they are now the second largest horticulture producer on the planet. On paper, it's an incredibly profitable shift, but There is a pretty tragic catch here. Because there is a serious lack of proper transport and cold storage infrastructure, small farms face devastating post-harvest losses. Imagine successfully growing this gorgeous field of high-value tomatoes, only to watch them literally rot by the side of the road because you can't transport them in time. Farmers are routinely forced to sell highly perishable items for throwaway pennies on the dollar. The financial potential is incredible, but the physical infrastructure desperately needs to catch up. Let's move on to Section 3. What drives the shift? Let's analyze exactly why farmers are making these massive, difficult transitions in their daily operations. You see, farmers aren't just guessing out there. They are making highly calculated business decisions in response to some very specific pressures. First and foremost is just the fundamental need to reduce risk. With unpredictable weather patterns, switching to drought-resistant crops is often a necessary move just to avoid bankruptcy when the rains fail. But it's also driven by shifting consumer demand. As our diets change and we want more diverse foods, farmers pivot to meet that market. Then you have the availability of new farming techniques, making it physically possible to try new things. Throw in changes in government policy, like certain crop subsidies that practically force a farmer's hand, and fluctuations in the relative prices of agricultural products, and you get the full picture. It's really an intricate dance of adapting to a constantly shifting global economy. Now for Section 4, measuring the real impact. We need to break down the actual payoff when these diversification strategies are put into action. The impacts here are honestly profound across the board, completely changing the economics of rural living. Take historically vulnerable rain-fed areas, places with no irrigation that rely entirely on the weather. For them, diversification finally provides a real opportunity to achieve stable, higher agricultural growth without living in constant fear of a dry season. And for the broader labor force, it generates a massive amount of employment. Why? Well, allied activities like running a dairy farm or carefully tending to fragile vegetables in horticulture use highly labor-intensive techniques. You can't just automate picking delicate flowers the way you can combine harvest a wheat field. You need human hands. And for small landholders, shifting to high-value food products means they get regular, quick cash flow all year round, rather than agonizingly waiting for one single annual harvest payout. And that leads us to our final section, cultivating a sustainable future and the vital shift towards organic farming. To really overcome the severe chemical contamination and soil erosion left over from the Green Revolution, this whole resource diversification strategy is increasingly being paired with a return to traditional, eco-friendly methods. Enter organic farming. This is a system that relies on crop rotation, green manure, compost, and biological pest control. It basically tosses those synthetic chemicals right out the window in favor of natural inputs, like animal manures and farm wastes. By using biological pest control, like bringing in helpful insects to eat the harmful ones, and green manure to replenish nutrients, organic farming physically heals the land. It aims for sustainable agricultural development that can serve our natural resources while keeping the soil robustly fertile for generations to come. Now, beyond just giving us consumers safer, highly nutritional food, the benefits of organic farming have these incredible economic ripple effects for the farmer. Yes, it actively protects the environment and rebuilds soil fertility, but economically, it's brilliant. Take the deep-rooted problem of seasonal rural unemployment. In traditional farming, there are these long dead periods, months, where workers literally have nothing to do but wait for the harvest. But because organic farming and diverse activities like dairy management actually require consistent daily labor, it incredibly helps solve this seasonal unemployment crisis by providing year-round work. Plus, it utilizes inexpensive, locally produced inputs like on-site compost. That saves small and marginal farmers from having to take out massive loans for expensive, imported chemical fertilizers, keeping them out of crippling debt cycles. As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to step back, look at the big picture, and ask ourselves a vital question. If agricultural diversification, spreading the risk across different crops and daily activities, along with organic farming, are the ultimate risk management tools for the modern farmer, does the survival of our food supply depend on farmers betting on nature rather than betting on synthetic chemicals? Is an active consumer demand for sustainable, diverse food the only real way to secure the future of global agriculture? It is definitely a fascinating thought to chew on the next time you sit down, look at your plate, and think about exactly where your meal comes from. Thanks so much for learning with me today.